Good afternoon, Cahirloch, senators, colleagues. Delighted to be with you here today and to follow on from all my colleagues here across Midlands and North-West. I think it's really important to stress, as no doubt many of you, if not all of you, know, about 70 to 80% of EU legislation that we work on impacts the communities and the sectors here. So this type of conversation is required on an ongoing basis. And you mentioned our relationship with the Northern Ireland. We just recently had the Northern Irish Scrutiny Committee also come out, and diplomacy and democracy starts with conversation. So I look forward to a good Q&A just shortly. Similar to my party colleague Nina Carberry, I also sit on 4 committees on behalf of the constituency of Midlands-North-West, full member on agriculture as well as gender equality. I'm a substitute member on regional development and justice and home affairs. I along with many MEPs across the political groups, co-founded an intergroup on mental health, looking at that across all the 20 committees that the European Parliament works on and serves to, and also on the EU delegation to the United States. But ultimately, our role is to represent the 1.8 million constituents across one of the most diverse and wide-spanning constituencies in our European Union. It is on their behalf that I speak to you today to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities ahead. Like many, I'm a Green Start holder, a Master's in Ag Extension, and have a real graw for rural living as well as farming. And that is a core part of the work I do on the Agricultural Committee, and I know how central the EU is to lives and the livelihoods of our Irish farmers, regardless of the type of farming that they do. And right now, one of the most significant negotiations underway, as colleagues had referred to earlier, is the future of the Common Agricultural Policy, taking us up from 2028 to 2034. And again, to re-echo, it's always the worst when you're the last to speak, but Ireland's presidency will coincide a real critical juncture and phase of these negotiations. And the decisions taken over the next 6 months will shape the future of EU farming, particularly Irish farming, for the many years to come. And we have 2 shadow rapporteurs here. The file writer for the Common Agriculture Policy is a part of the EPP group where Fine Gael sits, and that's by the name of Norbert Linz, a German MEP, who is a very workable person, has come to Ireland and will continue to do so up until the final negotiations. But my focus throughout these negotiations as the file writer for the Generation Renewal report is to look at not just young farmers, but also cradle to grave of farming. And I think that's incredibly important when we look at Generation Renewal. I think designing Parliament's policy on how we attract and retain the next generation of farmers across Europe is incredibly important. In my first draft report published this month, and happy to share to anybody who wishes to see that report, my number 1 priority is ensuring that at least 8 to 10% at least of the future CAP budget for young farmers is binding and not merely aspirational as it currently proposed by the Commission and being talked about in some of the EU councils. My work also focuses on land mobility, targeted help for women in agriculture, expanding mental health services through farm relief services that the Commissioner Hansen is certainly vocal on, as well as pension schemes run by member states, but certainly we can lean into best practices across other member states. Entitlements, I agree with my colleague Luke McFlanagan on that. Agri-envy schemes, entrepreneurship, innovation, and agri-tech. It's widespread. And I think as I close out this chapter on agriculture, I think we also have to collectively work together on the retaining of leader programs specifically for Midlands North-West representatives. And if you haven't spoken to any leader companies, large or small, then they will be on to you, because I think it's critical that we retain and we keep and grow our leader companies. I want to highlight briefly on my work on gender equality, because for me, making not just Ireland, but Europe a safer and fairer place for women is another key mission that drives my work in Brussels and in the constituency. I see firsthand new forms of gender-based violence and intimidation that are emerging online and are spewing into offline Earlier this year, I was a part of a cohort that travelled to the United Nations, where we met the Secretary General of the UN to discuss how to strengthen protections against gender-based violence and ensure women can participate fully and safely in public life. And of course, gender equality stretches far beyond the online world. We know this. It's also about equal pay. It's about better healthcare providers, political participation, entrepreneurship. Just to flag, 40% of our entrepreneurs in Europe are women, yet access to VC and angel funding is less than 3%. And the big buzzword in Europe right now is competitiveness. And if we're going to remove the 51% of our population from that competitiveness, then we're doing a disservice. I have a lot more to go on, but I see the gavel waving. I will just say, I want to talk briefly on security and defence, in specifically on preparedness, because I've sat in rooms in Brussels where Ireland has been openly described as the weakest flank on security and defence. And whether we like it or not, these perceptions have consequences. And I think as we go into presidency, I certainly would like us to have a real honest conversation with citizens around what preparedness looks like in both online and in the physical space when we look at defence and security, because for the first time, certainly in my lifetime at 38 years of age, we have war on multiple standpoints right across the world and in our European Union, and we can't forget that. And we also have to be adults at the table when we're having those conversations. And similar to my colleagues, some stuff that was asked is outside the scope of certainly within my remit as I see it, but colleagues might feel different. So I'm going to try and stick within the time and on topic of the work that we can do. To pick up on Senator O'Reilly's piece around realistic hold on the line of cap. I mean, ultimately, I think we can all confirm, all of us work within the Agriculture Committee, indirectly or directly. What we have now is the ring fence for basic farm payment, and where the MFF will go in the next coming weeks and months under our presidency is incredibly crucial. And where I would hope collectively, regardless of where we sit politically, that if there's shortcomings, then the National Exchequer needs to be needs to feed into the likes of agri schemes, or to your question around pension schemes. I did a lot of work on this, particularly around the generation renewal file, to make sure the first draft had some element of pensions within it. Other member states do it really well and have done so for decades. I think of Finland. I think in parts of Germany, in certain regions, very, very strong pension schemes that are held by local authorities or municipal areas. There is no reason why we can't learn from that and certainly incorporate it in. Where I don't want us to go to, though, is when I've spoken to older farmers who accepted the retirement scheme 20 years ago, I think they're thereabouts, they had to stand outside the farm gate, and then the knowledge transfer was lost. And we need that. You can't get everything from AI. I know your second question is around AI. You can't get everything from AI. You can't get everything from certain books or TikTok, much to what other politicians might feel. You need to have that knowledge transfer of people who have grown up on the farm. So for me, a pension scheme has to look in that. I do think an increase of farmers' age at a young level, not just 35, but 40, maybe 45, to really reflect on where we are actually and the reality of situations. Because I have a lot of young farmers who are in that lost generation where they're trying to get a farm or access to land, access to funding at a critical time when they might be starting a family or re-educating themselves or starting a new career, and are trying to grow the installation aid and don't have the front end to do that. So within this space, I think there's a lot of best practices that we can feed into, but the pension scheme will be and have to be run by the member state. There's I just wanted to pick up on one thing about Senator Keoghan had shared around the Migration Pact, because it was used almost as a negative. I sit on the Justice and Home Affairs Committee since 2019. I mean, if we didn't have the pact that had been negotiated and worked on for 10 years prior, you'll be saying something very different. I think a firm and fair humanitarian-based pact is required. most definitely. But to allude to other points that were raised about crises, humanitarian crises outside of Ireland, outside of Europe, then we need some form of system that we can support people in the best possible way. And you can only do that when you're at the table of like-minded people and across the 27 member states. Certainly from the amendments I put in, the conversations I've had with other countries, I think when you're on the Western side, where we are privileged to sit in comparison to the likes of Greece and Italy, we do have to learn and understand the Migration Pact is such a positive. To quickly move through, I know I wanted to pick up on Senator Cosgrove's point around workers' rights, and just to flag, I'm going to come back to you specifically because Regina Doherty, from a Fine Gael standpoint, sits on employment law. I sat on it last mandate and worked on pay transparency. I certainly do not want to see this member state water that down or delay. We're hearing some whispers of that, so hopefully we can find some tangible work there, because pay transparency is critical if we're going to remove and certainly reduce the 13-14% pay gap that women experience, and then their pension gap is impacted. And there's no reason why any company, large or small, can't be feeding into a better pay transparency for women or for people in general. There's a couple other, and she has the gavel in hand, so I'm going to try to avoid eye contact, but I just wanted to pick up on one thing. Peace Plus, in particular, obviously, in Nina's committee on Budge, she feeds it, but Reggie will also feed into it. Regional development will be putting or tabling amendments, I should say. In Northern Ireland, we've met, as I said in my opening statement, we've met on Peace Plus representatives. That Western Rail Corridor was also flagged, and I just wanted to take, based on evidence, the national government support is required. There is an ability to apply in the next round of MFF, and it'll be through the Connect Europe facility, but it has to be done through the Department of Transport. And one thing that's not flagged, and we talk a lot about trade deals, 1 billion a year gets spent and traded between African countries. And there's a number of regimes that are quite questionable in breaking of human law. And I would hope this House, and certainly us as MEPs, would look to the relationships we have in Africa, because they are a good source of support, but we need to also support them. Thank you. To quickly run through, I'm going to start where the debate just finished, and to answer your question, Senator Brady, I'm delighted. I was one of the MEPs to vote in favour of safeguards on the Mercosur trade deal. So that debates that we just had and misinformation that was just shared would not be used in that case. I only have a few minutes, and I wanted to run through some points. And one point I didn't highlight in my earlier interventions was around the Occupied Territories Bill and the stance on the genocide that is happening by Netanyahu. I also want to be really clear in my language that when we talk about Israel, it's Netanyahu and allies specifically, and not the Jewish people or Israeli people, because there seems to be misinformation online and offline within that. I have been very clear on the removal or the stoppage of the Israel trade agreement, and only disappointed in many cases that we're not seeing services included in the Occupied Territories Bill here, to be clear on that. But I also think it shouldn't just be in Gaza that we're looking at occupied territories. There's goods and services coming in and out of the EU from Cyprus territories that were invaded by Turkey, and many other countries. I mentioned Africa earlier, and I think if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly and with good judicial and legal standing. Senator Boyle, your answers and questions on fisheries were already answered. Only delighted. Our relationship, hence the reason why it's important that Fine Gael is in the EPP group, is our relationship with Commissioner Caddis. And that's strong, and we need to build on that. It's not a clear pathway, but certainly things do not. You could be the loudest in the room in the nosebleed seats and getting nothing done, or you could be in the Coliseum and actually trying to get stuff done. And I think sometimes we forget about that in politics. So we need to get back to that, and being in the EPP allows us to have those interventions and conversations. I just wanted to pick up on a real issue, because I work really hard along with my team on gender equality. And the real issue with women's safety and evidence is very clear. And this is to pick up a question that was named earlier around our trans community. overwhelming majority of violence against women happens in the home or committed by someone known to the person. 35%, that's more than 1 in 3 women have experienced psychological, physical, or sexual abuse from an intimate partner. And scapegoating or using other minority groups does absolutely nothing for women's safety. It's actually a distraction. And I'll lean into the Senator Mullin's point around pornography. From a European standpoint, actually from an Irish standpoint, access to porn is on average about 10 to 13 years. I do think it's younger. If you look at the UK, it's younger than 7. And if we're taking in the realm of the increase of violence online and offline, you're right in the case of we do have to look at what Europe can do. We also have to look at what Ireland can do. We hold a number of tech companies accountable here, or not accountable enough in many cases. And the rollout of the verification tools by the end of the year that was led by the EU Commission for this country and any other member state is probably the right step to do that. But we have to also have age-appropriate sexual education in our schools. So consent-based conversations need to happen at a younger age. Sadly, if pornography is at the age of 10, at the average age of 10 here. Can I just finish? Sorry, I thought you were going to wrap me up there. But, if anybody has tuned in, and a lot do, to the last nearly 3 hours of this debate, they've seen a lot of negativity of what the European Union is. And I think that's a disgrace. We have benefited so greatly. My generation has benefited. We can live, work, love, study, travel anywhere across 27 member states. Our young people have access to interrailing. Our third level universities are the pinnacle of best practice when it looks to R&D and other investments into our education. When you look at Erasmus, so any euro, I think it was Senator Scahill had flagged, any euro that gets spent by the government with EU taxpayers has to be identified, because what we end up having is a nationalistic anti-European sentiment. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing it sadly more and more. But we cannot be ignorant to the fact that 83% of our citizens is pro-European. And to finally say our reputations are not permanent, they must be protected, strengthened, and earned. And we do stand at a pivotal point. And I hope what we've just seen in the last minutes in the previous intervention and the ones prior to that around misinformation, we do call it out. You do hold us accountable, as we do you. And we support our councillors and our committee of the regions and actually putting Ireland at the very core of being pro-European. And we bucked the trend. We bucked it in 2024. We need to continue to do it because, as we all know, equality is very hard fought, but very quickly lost. Thank you very much.